The cold wind swept across the barren landscape of Silver Reef, Utah, carrying the sound of Rose Riley's anguished screams through the thin walls of their homestead as her fifth child slipped away before taking its first breath. The year was 1878, and the unforgiving frontier had claimed yet another innocent soul, leaving Rose's already fragile spirit shattered beyond recognition. Wade Northrop stood outside the bedroom door, his weathered hat clutched tightly against his chest, knuckles white with tension as the midwife emerged with tears streaming down her wrinkled face. No words were necessary. He had seen this look 4 times before, each time hoping it would be the last. Each time praying that God would finally grant them mercy. "She's asking for you," the midwife whispered, her voice barely audible over the howling wind. "But Mr. Northrop, I fear she may not recover from this one, not in her heart." Wade nodded solemnly, placing his hat on the wooden peg by the door before entering the room that smelled of blood and bitter disappointment. Rose lay motionless on their bed, her auburn hair splayed across the pillow like a fan of autumn leaves, her skin as pale as the winter moon that hung outside their window. "Rose," he whispered, kneeling beside her and taking her cold hand in his. "I'm here, my love." Her eyelids fluttered open, revealing eyes once as vibrant as summer bluebonnets, now dulled by grief too heavy for any soul to bear. "We lost him," she murmured, her voice cracking like dry timber. "Our boy. We lost our boy." "I know," Wade said, his voice steady despite the storm raging within him. He had to be strong for her. One of them had to remain standing. "But we haven't lost each other." Rose turned away, tears streaming silently down her hollow cheeks. 5 babies, Wade. 5 tiny graves on that hill. "What did I do to deserve such punishment?" "Nothing," he assured her, climbing onto the bed beside her and pulling her fragile body against his chest. "You've done nothing but love with your whole heart. Sometimes." His voice faltered. "Sometimes the world is just cruel without reason." "I can't do this anymore," Rose whispered against his chest, her body trembling with sobs. "I can't keep burying our children. I can't keep feeling them grow inside me only to have them taken away. I'm not strong enough." Wade held her tighter, his calloused hands gently stroking her back as he had done through 4 losses before. "Then I'll be strong enough for both of us," he promised, his own tears falling silently into her hair. "For as long as you need." Outside, the wind continued its mournful howl, a fitting chorus to the grief that had become too familiar in their home. But Wade made a silent vow as he held his wife through the night. This time would be different. This time, he wouldn't just help her survive the loss. This time, he would find a way to help her live again. As dawn broke over the rugged mountains surrounding Silver Reef, Wade carefully disentangled himself from Rose's sleeping form. Her face, even in slumber, bore the marks of profound grief, lips downturned, brows furrowed, dried tears crusting her lashes. He brushed a gentle kiss against her forehead before quietly dressing and making his way outside. The crisp morning air bit at his skin as he walked to the small workshop adjacent to their home. Inside, he pulled a worn piece of paper from his pocket sketches for a cradle he had been working on in secret, hoping to surprise Rose when her pregnancy progressed further. Now, with trembling hands, he folded the paper and tucked it away in a drawer. Instead, he reached for different tools and began working on something else entirely. Hours later, Rose awoke to an empty bed, her body aching in places that reminded her immediately of yesterday's tragedy. The physical pain was almost welcome a distraction from the hollow emptiness that threatened to consume her. She struggled to sit up, noticing a cup of tea and some bread that Wade had left on the bedside table. The tea had long gone cold, but she sipped it anyway, forcing herself to swallow past the lump in her throat. The sound of hammering drew her attention to the window. Through the glass, she could see Wade working diligently in the yard. She knew what he was doing without having to see it clearly. Another tiny coffin. Another piece of her heart to be buried in the rocky soil. When Wade entered the house later that morning, his shirt damp with sweat despite the cool air, he found Rose sitting in her rocking chair, staring blankly at the wall. "I've prepared everything," he said gently, kneeling before her and taking her limp hands in his. "Mrs. Thompson will be here soon to help you dress. The Reverend can come whenever we're ready." Rose nodded mechanically, her eyes vacant. "What did you name him?" The question caught Wade off guard. With their previous losses, they had chosen names together, names they had selected months before, full of hope and dreams. "I haven't," he admitted. "I thought we should decide together." A single tear slipped down Rose's cheek. "Samuel," she whispered, "after your father." Wade's throat tightened painfully. "Samuel is perfect," he managed to say, squeezing her hands. "Samuel Riley Northrop." The funeral was a small affair, as were the 4 that came before it. The citizens of Silver Reef had grown accustomed to the Northrop's tragedies, offering silent support and respectful distance. Reverend Collins spoke words meant to comfort, but they washed over Wade like rain on stone, making no impression. His focus remained on Rose, who stood beside him like a ghost, present in body only. As the tiny coffin was lowered into the earth beside its siblings, Wade felt Rose sway slightly. He steadied her with an arm around her waist, bearing her weight as her knees threatened to give out. "Almost done," he whispered in her ear. "You're doing well." When the last shovelful of dirt covered Samuel's resting place, the small gathering dispersed with murmured condolences and downcast eyes. Only Wade and Rose remained, standing before the row of 5 small crosses that marked the brief existence of their children. "We should go home," Wade said gently after they had stood in silence for what seemed like hours. "It's getting cold." Rose didn't move. "How can we go back there?" she asked, her voice hollow. To that empty house with all its ghosts, Wade had no answer that wouldn't sound trite or meaningless. Instead, he simply said, "One step at a time, my love. Just one step at a time." He led her back to their homestead where Mrs. Thompson had prepared a simple supper and left it warming on the stove. Rose picked at her food while Wade watched helplessly, wishing he could force nourishment into her frail body through sheer will. That night, as they lay in bed, Rose stared at the ceiling, her breathing shallow and uneven. "Do you ever think about leaving?" she asked suddenly. "Leaving Silver Reef, this house, these memories?" She turned to face him, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "Maybe we're cursed here," Wade considered her words carefully. They had built this place together, clearing the land and constructing their home with their own hands after their wedding 6 years ago. Their dreams had taken root here, dreams of a large family, of children running through fields of wildflowers, of laughter filling every corner of their home. "If you want to leave, we'll leave," he said finally. "We can go anywhere you want, start fresh." Rose closed her eyes. "I don't know what I want anymore," she admitted, "except for the pain to stop." Wade gathered her in his arms, his chin resting on top of her head. "It won't always hurt this much," he promised, though he wasn't sure if he believed it himself. "We'll find our way through this darkness." "How can you be so certain?" she asked, her voice muffled against his chest. "Because I have to be," he replied simply. "Because I love you too much to believe anything else." As days turned into weeks, Rose retreated further into herself. She moved through the house like a specter, performing basic tasks with mechanical precision, but without any spark of life. She ate only when Wade gently insisted, and spoke only when directly addressed. At night, she often woke screaming from nightmares, her arms reaching for phantom babies that would never be placed in them. Wade watched his wife fade away, powerless to stop it. He tried everything, bringing her wildflowers from the meadow she once loved to walk through, reading to her from her favorite books, even riding into town to purchase expensive chocolate from the general store. Nothing seemed to penetrate the fog of grief that surrounded her. One evening, as Wade returned from tending to their small herd of cattle, he found the house empty. Panic seized him until he spotted a familiar figure on the hill where their children rested. He approached slowly, not wanting to intrude on her private moment but needing to ensure she was all right. Rose knelt before the 5 crosses, arranging small bouquets of desert flowers at the base of each one. Her lips moved in silent conversation with those who could no longer hear. Wade hung back, his heart breaking anew at the sight. Then, as if sensing his presence, Rose turned. "I was telling them about the sunrise this morning," she said, her voice stronger than it had been in weeks. "How the colors reminded me of Emma's favorite hair ribbon." Emma had been their third loss, a little girl who had lived only 2 days, long enough for them to glimpse her honey-colored hair and perfectly formed fingernails. Wade swallowed hard at the memory. "That's good," he said, unsure how to respond. "I'm sure they would have loved to hear that." Rose looked back at the graves. "Do you think they're together, our 5 little angels?" "Yes," Wade answered without hesitation. "I believe they're together watching over us." Rose nodded slowly. "I'd like to think that too." She stood, brushing dirt from her skirt. "I made stew for supper. It might not be very good. I haven't cooked properly in a while." It was such a mundane statement, so ordinary and domestic, that Wade felt a flicker of hope ignite in his chest. "I'm sure it's delicious," he said, offering his arm to her. "And if it's terrible, we'll feed it to the chickens and no one will ever know." A ghost of a smile touched Rose's lips, barely there, but unmistakable. It was the first he had seen since before Samuel's birth, and Wade treasured it like a miner would a newly discovered gold nugget. That night, as they prepared for bed, Rose spoke words that sent a chill through Wade's heart. "I think God is punishing me," she said quietly, brushing out her hair at the vanity. "For something I must have done in a past life, or for being too proud when we first married, for wanting too much." Wade crossed the room in 3 strides, kneeling beside her and taking the brush from her hands. "No," he said firmly, "I won't let you believe that. God doesn't work that way." "Then why, Wade?" She turned to him, her eyes swimming with tears. "Why us? Why 5 times?" He shook his head helplessly. "I don't know, my love, but I know it's not punishment. Some things just happen without reason or justice. Dr. Simmons says I shouldn't try again," she confessed, her voice barely audible. "He says my body can't take another loss. That next time it might be me we bury." The thought of losing Rose struck Wade like a physical blow. "Then we won't try again," he said immediately. "We have each other. That's enough." "But you've always wanted children," Rose argued, tears spilling down her cheeks. "You'd make such a wonderful father. I've seen you with the Andersons' little ones, how naturally you take to them. I've failed you as a wife." Wade took her face in his hands, forcing her to meet his gaze. "Listen to me, Rose Riley Northrop. You have never failed me. Not once, not ever. When I married you, I didn't marry you for the children you might give me. I married you because I love you, your spirit, your heart, your soul. That hasn't changed. It will never change." Rose collapsed against him then, sobbing as if her heart would break, and perhaps it was breaking, Wade thought. But maybe it needed to break completely before it could begin to heal. He held her through the night, murmuring reassurances and promises, vowing silently that somehow, someday, he would help her find joy again. The turning point came unexpectedly. nearly 3 months after Samuel's death. Wade had ridden into town for supplies, leaving Rose alone at the homestead. As he loaded his purchases onto his horse, he overheard a conversation between two women outside the mercantile. "Did you hear about the Jacksons' situation?" one woman asked the other. "Lost both parents to the fever last month. 3 children left behind with no family to speak of." "Yes, terrible business," the other replied with a click of her tongue. "Reverend Collins is trying to find homes for them, but who has room for 3 more mouths to feed? They'll likely be split up and sent to different territories." Wade paused, the women's words echoing in his mind. Before he could stop himself, he approached them, tipping his hat politely. "Excuse me, ladies. I couldn't help overhearing about the Jackson children. Could you tell me more?" Mrs. Peterson, the postmaster's wife, eyed him curiously. "The eldest is 10, a boy named Daniel. Then there's Lily, who's 7, and little Thomas, who's just turned 4. Reverend Collins has them staying at the church for now, but it can't be a permanent solution." "Are they healthy? Well behaved?" Wade pressed. "Oh, as good as gold, those children," Mrs. Abernathy assured him. "Just lost and frightened, poor things." "Why do you ask, Mr. Northrop?" Wade hesitated, knowing he should discuss this with Rose first. But something in his heart told him this might be what they both needed: a purpose, a way to channel their love. "Just curious," he said finally. "Thank you for the information, ladies. Good day to you both." He completed his errands quickly, then made his way to the church at the center of town. Reverend Collins received him warmly, though his surprise was evident when Wade inquired about the Jackson children. "They're out back," the Reverend explained, leading Wade through the small church to a yard where 3 children sat beneath an apple tree. The oldest boy was reading from a tattered book, while the younger 2 listened attentively. "Fine children," Reverend Collins said softly. "Their parents were good people. Matthew Jackson was a carpenter, skilled hands, honest work. His wife Beatrice kept the cleanest house in town and made pies that would make you weep with joy. The fever took them both within days of each other." Wade watched the children, noticing how the oldest boy, Daniel, kept a protective arm around his little brother. How the girl, Lily, braided small flowers into her doll's yarn hair with careful fingers. How, despite their circumstances, they still found ways to be children. "May I speak with them?" Wade asked. The Reverend nodded, calling the children over. 3 pairs of curious eyes looked up at Wade: Daniel's brown and cautious, Lily's blue and solemn, Thomas's green and wide with innocent wonder. "Children, this is Mr. Northrop," Reverend Collins introduced. "He has a ranch outside of town and wanted to meet you." Wade crouched down to their level, smiling gently. "Hello there. That's a fine book you were reading, Daniel." The boy clutched the book tighter. "It was my pa's. He taught me to read from it." "He must have been very smart," Wade observed. "The smartest," Daniel agreed, a flash of pride breaking through his reserve. "And what about you, Miss Lily? Those are beautiful flowers you've gathered." The little girl nodded shyly. "Mama showed me how to make crowns from them. I'm practicing so I don't forget." Wade felt his heart constrict at the simple statement. That's a wonderful way to remember her. Little Thomas, unable to contain his curiosity any longer, blurted out, "Do you have horses at your ranch, Mr.?" Wade chuckled. "I do indeed. 3 horses and a pony that might be just the right size for a young man like yourself." Thomas's eyes widened further. "A real pony." "A real pony," Wade confirmed. "His name is Rusty on account of his color." He spent an hour with the children, listening to their stories, answering their questions about ranch life, and by the time he left, his mind was made up. But the most important question remained: how would Rose respond? When Wade arrived home, he found Rose sitting on the porch, a half-finished piece of knitting in her lap the first time she had picked up her needles since before Samuel's birth. It was a small sign of healing that gave him courage. "You're late," she observed, but there was no accusation in her voice. "Did something happen in town?" Wade secured his horse and joined her on the porch, taking a deep breath. "Rose, I met some people today. 3 people, actually, and I'd like to tell you about them." As the sun set behind the mountains, Wade told Rose about the Jackson children. He described Daniel's serious demeanor that hit a quick mind, Lily's gentle care for her doll and her brothers, Thomas's innocent exuberance despite his circumstances. He explained their situation: orphaned, homeless, facing separation. Rose listened silently, her knitting forgotten in her lap, her expression unreadable. "I know this is sudden," Wade continued, "and I know we should have discussed it first. But Rose, when I saw those children, I couldn't help but think that maybe, just maybe, this is why we've suffered so much. So we could understand what it means to be lost, to need a home, to long for belonging." Rose's hands trembled slightly. "You want to take them in," she said, not a question but a statement. "I want us to consider it," Wade corrected gently. "They need a home, we have one. They need love. We have so much to give, even if our hearts are broken. But Rose, this has to be something we both want." "I won't press you if you're not ready." Rose stood suddenly, walking to the edge of the porch and looking out at the land they had worked so hard to cultivate. The setting sun painted the fields gold, the same fields where they had once imagined their children playing. "5 graves on that hill," she said softly. "5 pieces of my heart buried in the ground. I've been so focused on what we've lost that I've forgotten what we still have." She turned to face Wade, tears glistening in her eyes. "Do you really think we could be what they need?" Wade approached her slowly, taking her hands in his. "I think we can try. And I think that trying might help us find our way back to each other, back to living instead of just surviving." Rose was quiet for a long moment, her gaze drifting to the hillside where their babies rested. When she spoke again, her voice was stronger than it had been in months. "I'd like to meet them," she said. "Not to make any promises yet, but to meet them." The next day, Wade and Rose rode into Silver Reef together. It was Rose's first trip to town since Samuel's funeral, and Wade noticed how she straightened her spine as they approached, lifting her chin as if preparing for battle. The curious glances from townspeople washed over them, but Rose kept her gaze forward, focused on their destination. Reverend Collins welcomed them warmly, expressing particular pleasure at seeing Rose. "Mrs. Northrop, it does my heart good to see you in town again. The ladies of the sewing circle have missed your company." Rose managed a small smile. "Thank you, Reverend. It's good to be out again. My husband tells me you have some special guests staying with you." "Indeed I do. The children are having their lunch in the kitchen. Would you like to meet them now?" Rose nodded, her hand finding Wade's and gripping it tightly. The kitchen was filled with the scent of fresh bread and the sound of childish voices. The 3 Jackson children sat at a simple wooden table, being supervised by Mrs. Collins. They looked up as the adults entered, curiosity evident in their expressions. Daniel recognized Wade immediately and offered a polite nod. Lily shrank back slightly, suddenly shy, while Thomas beamed with recognition. "It's the horseman," Thomas exclaimed, causing Rose to let out a surprised laugh, the first Wade had heard from her in so long that the sound nearly brought him to tears. "That's right," Wade agreed, guiding Rose forward. "And this is my wife, Mrs. Northrop." "You can call me Rose," she said softly, her voice trembling slightly. "I'm very pleased to meet you all." Mrs. Collins tactfully suggested that she and the Reverend give the Northrops some time alone with the children. Once they had departed, an awkward silence fell over the kitchen. Rose broke it by noticing the book beside Daniel's plate. "Are you reading The Adventures of Tom Sawyer?" she asked. "That's one of my favorites." Daniel's expression brightened slightly. "Yes, madam. Pa was reading it to us before he got sick. I'm trying to finish it for Lily and Thomas, but some of the words are difficult. Perhaps we could read it together sometime," Rose offered. "I used to be a school teacher before I married Mr. Northrop." "You were?" Lily asked, speaking for the first time. "Did you teach lots of children?" Rose nodded, taking a seat at the table while Wade remained standing, watching the interaction with hopeful eyes. "I did. 23 pupils in my last class, all different ages." "Did they listen to you?" Lily pressed, clearly impressed by the idea of controlling so many children. "Most of the time," Rose answered with a small smile, "though there was one boy who put a frog in my desk drawer." Thomas giggled at this, his earlier reticence forgotten. "Did the frog jump on you?" "It did," Rose confirmed. "Right onto my copy of Romeo and Juliet." "I screamed so loudly that the minister next door came running, thinking there was a murder happening." The children laughed, and Wade saw something illuminate in Rose's eyes, a spark of the woman she had been before grief had dimmed her light. The conversation flowed more easily after that. Rose asked the children about their favorite foods, their interests, their memories of their parents. She listened with genuine attention, drawing out even the reserved Daniel with her gentle questions. When Thomas climbed into her lap an hour later, showing her a small wooden horse his father had carved for him, Wade saw Rose's arms encircle the boy with a natural protectiveness that made his throat tight with emotion. As they prepared to leave, Daniel approached Wade while Rose was saying goodbye to the younger children. "Sir," he said solemnly, "are you and your wife thinking of taking us in?" Wade was taken aback by the directness of the question. "We're considering it," he answered honestly. "Would that be something you might want?" Daniel glanced at his siblings. "I promised Pa before he died that I'd keep us together, that I'd look after Lily and Thomas." His young face took on an expression far too mature for his years, "but it's hard. Thomas cries for Ma at night, and Lily pretends to be brave, but I hear her crying too. I don't know how to make it better for them." Wade placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "That's a heavy burden for someone your age, Daniel. Your pa would be proud of how you've looked after your brother and sister, but he wouldn't want you to carry that weight alone." Daniel's lower lip trembled slightly before he firmed it. "Do you have other children at your ranch?" The question pierced Wade's heart, but he answered truthfully. "No. We don't have any living children. We've lost 5 babies. The last one just a few months ago." Understanding dawned in Daniel's young eyes. "That's why your wife looks sad even when she smiles." Wade nodded, impressed by the boy's perception. "Yes. She's been through a great deal of sorrow. But meeting you 3 has brought a light back to her eyes that I've missed for a long time." Daniel considered this. "If we came to live with you, we wouldn't be replacing your babies. We'd still miss our Ma and Pa, and you'd still miss your little ones." "That's exactly right," Wade agreed, touched by the child's wisdom. "Grief doesn't go away when new love comes in. It just makes room for both to live in our hearts." Daniel nodded, seemingly satisfied with this answer. "I think," he said carefully, "I think that might be all right then." On the ride home, Rose was quiet, lost in thought. Wade didn't press her, knowing she needed time to process the emotions of the day. It wasn't until they had returned to their homestead and settled onto the porch with cups of coffee that she finally spoke. "They're wonderful children," she said softly. "So brave despite everything they've been through." Wade nodded. "They are. Daniel especially has taken on so much responsibility." "Too much," Rose agreed. "He's trying to be father and mother to those little ones. No child should have to grow up that fast." She sipped her coffee thoughtfully. Their parents raised them well. You can see it in their manners and how they care for each other. You seemed comfortable with them, Wade observed carefully. Rose's lips curved in a small smile. I was. More than I expected to be. She set her cup down, turning to face Wade fully. When Thomas climbed into my lap, I felt something crack open inside me. Something I thought had died with Samuel and our other babies. It hurt, Wade. It hurt because it reminded me of all we've lost, all I'll never experience with our own children. Wade reached for her hand, but she wasn't finished. But beneath that pain, there was something else. Something like purpose. Like maybe all this suffering hasn't been for nothing if it allows us to understand what those children are going through. She took a deep breath. I want to try, Wade. I want to offer them a home. Wade pulled her into his arms, his heart so full he could hardly speak. Are you certain? It won't be easy. Nothing worthwhile ever is, Rose replied, her voice muffled against his chest. We can't replace their parents and they can't replace our babies. But maybe we can create something new together, something that honors both what they've lost and what we have. The process of bringing the Jackson children to their home took time. There were legal matters to arrange, preparations to make, and most importantly, a gentle transition to plan. Reverend Collins suggested that the children visit the Northrop ranch several times before any permanent arrangement was made, allowing everyone to become comfortable with one another. During these visits, Wade and Rose began to see the unique personalities of each child more clearly. Daniel was serious and responsible, but beneath his mature exterior lurked a boy who loved adventure stories and could spend hours exploring the creek that ran through their property. Lily was artistic and sensitive, with a gift for finding beauty in the simplest things: a smooth stone, a uniquely shaped cloud, the pattern of light through leaves. Thomas was all energy and curiosity, constantly asking questions and fearlessly attempting to befriend every animal on the ranch. The children brought life back to the house in a way Wade hadn't realized it was missing. Rooms that had been silent for months echoed with footsteps and laughter. Meals became lively affairs with stories and questions, replacing the heavy silence that had hung between him and Rose for too long. Most remarkable was the change in Rose herself. Each visit seemed to restore another piece of her spirit. She began baking again cookies and pies that delighted the children. She organized fishing expeditions to the creek, taught Lily to sew doll clothes, and patiently answered Thomas's endless questions about everything from why the sky is blue to how butterflies know where to migrate. Not every moment was easy. There were days when grief caught Rose unaware, when the sight of Thomas's small hand in hers reminded her painfully of the children who would never hold her hand. There were nights when she wept silently beside Wade, mourning what they had lost even as they prepared to embrace something new. "Am I betraying them?" she asked Wade one night, her voice small in the darkness. "Our babies. By opening my heart to these children, am I dishonoring their memory?" Wade pulled her closer. "No, my love. I believe our little ones would want us to share the love we would have given them. I think they would approve of us helping 3 children who need us." After several weeks of visits, the day came for the children to move permanently to the Northrop ranch. Wade had spent days preparing rooms for them, a space for Daniel that adjoined a smaller room for Thomas, and a bright corner room for Lily that caught the morning sunlight. Rose had sewn new curtains and quilts, wanting everything to feel special and welcoming. As their wagon approached with Reverend Collins accompanying them, Rose stood on the porch, nervousness etched across her features. "What if they change their minds?" she whispered to Wade. "What if they get here and decide they don't want to stay?" Wade squeezed her hand. "Then we'll respect their feelings and find another solution. But Rose, I don't think that will happen. They've chosen us as much as we've chosen them. The wagon rolled to a stop, and three anxious faces peered out. For a moment, no one moved. Then Thomas broke the tension by leaping from the wagon with a shout of excitement. "We're here! We really get to live here now." He ran toward Rose, who knelt to receive his enthusiastic hug. Lily followed more sedately, clutching her doll and a small bundle of possessions. She approached the porch steps hesitantly until Rose extended her free arm. "Welcome home, Lily," she said softly. The little girl's face brightened, and she joined the embrace. Only Daniel remained by the wagon, his expression guarded as he helped Reverend Collins unload their few belongings. Wade approached him, recognizing the boy's struggle. "It's all right to feel unsure," he said quietly. "This is a big change." Daniel looked up at him, vulnerability clear in his young eyes. "What if we don't belong here? What if you and Mrs. Northrop change your minds about wanting us?" Wade crouched to meet the boy at eye level. "Daniel, when I married Rose, I promised to love her for better or worse, in sickness and in health. That's the kind of promise we're making to you three today. Not one that changes when things get difficult, but one that grows stronger through challenges." "Like a family?" Daniel asked, his voice barely audible. "Exactly like a family," Wade confirmed. "Different from the one you had with your parents, but real and permanent all the same." After a moment's hesitation, Daniel nodded, straightening his shoulders. "All right then, I'll try." "That's all any of us can do," Wade replied, helping the boy with his bundle. "Try our best day by day." The adjustment period wasn't without difficulties. The children had nightmares, moments of overwhelming grief for their parents, and occasional testing of boundaries. Rose and Wade learned to navigate these challenges together, discovering that their own experiences with loss gave them patience and understanding that might otherwise have been lacking. One night, about 2 months after the children had come to live with them, Wade awoke to find Rose's side of the bed empty. Concerned, he rose to look for her, only to hear soft voices coming from Lily's room. He paused outside the door, listening. "I dreamed about my mama," Lily was saying, her voice thick with tears. "She was making biscuits and singing, but when I tried to hug her, she disappeared." "I have dreams like that too," Rose replied gently, "about the babies I lost. Sometimes in my dreams I can hear them crying, but I can never find them." "Does it ever stop hurting?" Lily asked. There was a pause before Rose answered. "Not completely, but it changes. The sharp pain becomes a dull ache, and eventually it becomes a kind of loving remembrance. The important thing is to never forget, but to allow yourself to find joy again too." "I'm afraid I'll forget what she looked like," Lily confessed, "or the sound of her laugh." "Then we'll make sure that doesn't happen," Rose promised. "Tomorrow we can start a memory book. You can draw pictures of your parents and write down all the stories you remember about them. That way, they'll always be with you, even as you build a new life here." Wade leaned against the wall, his heart full as he listened to Rose comforting the child with wisdom born of her own suffering. In that moment, he saw with perfect clarity how their journey through grief had prepared them for this very purpose, to help 3 wounded children heal while finding healing themselves. As summer turned to fall and fall to winter, the 5 of them began to forge a true family bond. They established new traditions while honoring old ones from both households. At Rose's suggestion, they visited the graves of both the Northrop babies and the Jackson parents regularly, bringing flowers and sharing stories. On Christmas Eve, 6 months after the children had come to live with them, Wade found Rose standing by the window after the children had gone to bed, watching snow fall gently outside. "Penny for your thoughts," he said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. She leaned back against him. I was thinking about how different this Christmas is from last year. Last year, I was heavy with Samuel, full of hope that finally we'd have a child to celebrate with. She turned in his arms to face him. I never imagined that a year later, we'd have 3 children sleeping under our roof. Are you happy, Rose? Wade asked, searching her face. Truly happy, she considered the question seriously. Not in the way I once was before we knew such grief, but yes, I'm happy in a deeper way, a way that knows the value of joy because it understands sorrow. She touched his cheek tenderly. You kept your promise, Wade. You were strong when I couldn't be. You carried me through the darkness until I could see light again. We carried each other, he corrected. And now we have 3 more hearts to help carry the load. On Christmas morning, after presents had been opened and breakfast devoured, Daniel approached Wade and Rose with a carefully wrapped package. This is from all of us, he said, unusually solemn even for him. We've been working on it secretly. Rose unwrapped the gift to find a handmade book, its cover decorated with pressed flowers and careful lettering that read Our Family. Inside were drawings by Lily, stories written by Daniel, and handprints from Thomas. But most touching were the pages dedicated to the Northrop babies, 5 pages with names, dates, and small tokens. A pressed flower for each grave, a poem, a prayer. So they're part of our family too, Daniel explained. Even though we never met them, we thought they should be remembered at Christmas. Rose couldn't speak, tears streaming down her face as she traced the names of her lost children with trembling fingers. Wade put his arm around her, his own vision blurred. This is the most beautiful gift we've ever received, he managed to say. Thank you for including our little ones in your hearts. Thomas, unable to bear the emotional weight of the moment, broke the tension by declaring loudly, "And now can we go try my new sled?" The laughter that followed was healing, a perfect blend of joy and remembrance that seemed to define their newly formed family. Spring brought new life to the ranch calves in the field, flowers in the garden, and a lightness to Rose's spirit that Wade had feared might never return. She still had moments of sadness, days when memories weighed heavily, but they no longer defined her existence. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the children play in the yard, Rose took Wade's hand. "I've been thinking," she said tentatively, "about making things more official." Wade turned to her, curious. "What do you mean? The children have been with us for nearly a year now. They feel like ours in every way that matters. I think it's time we spoke to them about adoption, about legally becoming Northrops." Wade's heart swelled. They had discussed this possibility before, but had agreed to give everyone time to adjust before taking such a permanent step. "Are you certain?" Rose nodded. "I am. They deserve the security of knowing this is forever, that they are truly our children now." When they broached the subject with the children that night, the reactions varied. Thomas, at 5 years old, was simply excited by the idea of a celebration. Lily asked thoughtful questions about whether she would still be a Jackson in her heart. Daniel, now 11, was the most contemplative. "If we become Northrops," he asked slowly, "would it be like betraying our parents, like trying to replace them?" Rose shook her head. "Never. Your mother and father will always be your first parents, the ones who gave you life and loved you from the beginning. Taking our name wouldn't erase them, it would simply be adding to your family, acknowledging what we've already become to each other." Daniel considered this. "Could we maybe keep Jackson as our middle names? So we'd be Daniel Jackson Northrop, Lily Jackson Northrop, and Thomas Jackson Northrop." "I think that's a perfect solution," Wade said, touched by the boy's desire to honor both families. The adoption was finalized in June of 1880, 2 years after Samuel's birth and death. The whole town of Silver Reef turned out for the celebration. which doubled as a homecoming of sorts for Rose, who had gradually begun participating in community life again. As they stood before the judge, the five of them forming a circle of joined hands, Wade looked at his wife at the strength and love radiating from her face as she promised to be a mother to these children for the rest of her life. He thought of how far they had come from that devastating day when she had declared herself too weak to go on, of how they had supported each other through the darkest valley of grief to find an unexpected path to joy. The judge pronounced them legally a family, and cheers erupted from the gathered crowd. Daniel stood tall beside Wade, his expression serious but his eyes bright with belonging. Lily twirled in her new dress, her face alight with happiness. Thomas launched himself into Rose's arms, declaring loudly that this was the best day ever. Later that night, after celebrations and congratulations, after the children had fallen asleep in their beds no longer guests, but truly home, Wade and Rose walked hand in hand to the hillside, where 5 small crosses stood in silent witness. Rose knelt, placing a bouquet of wildflowers at the center of the row. "I want them to know," she said softly, "our angel babies. I want them to know that we found a way to be happy again, to be parents after all, that their short lives had meaning." Wade knelt beside her, his arm around her shoulders. "They know, my love. I believe they know." Rose leaned against him, drawing strength from his solid presence as she had countless times before. "Thank you," she whispered, "for being strong when I couldn't be, for not giving up on me, on us." "Never," Wade promised, kissing her forehead. "Not then, not now, not ever." As they walked back to their home, to their sleeping children and their shared future, Rose paused to look up at the star-filled sky. She thought of all they had lost and all they had found, of how suffering could carve spaces in the heart that joy could later fill in unexpected ways. 5 years later, the Northrop ranch had expanded, both in acreage and in purpose. What had once been a modest cattle operation had grown to include a small school where Rose taught not only Daniel, Lily, and Thomas, but also several children from neighboring ranches. Wade had built the schoolhouse himself, incorporating a library dedicated to the memory of Matthew and Beatrice Jackson. Daniel, now 16, had developed into a skilled horseman who helped Wade with the increasingly prosperous ranch operations. Lily, at 13, showed a remarkable talent for music, playing the piano that Wade had surprised the family with on her 12th birthday. Thomas, 11 and still boundlessly energetic, excelled at mathematics and dreamed of becoming an engineer. The hill with the 5 crosses had been transformed into a peaceful garden where wildflowers grew in abundance. The children often visited there, sometimes alone and sometimes with Rose or Wade, maintaining the connection between their present happiness and the losses that had shaped their family's journey. One crisp autumn day in 1885, as Rose was preparing dinner with Lily's help, a wagon approached the house. Wade and Daniel, who had been mending fences in the north pasture, rode in to investigate the unexpected visitors. The wagon carried Reverend Collins and a young woman holding a baby wrapped in a threadbare blanket. Rose wiped her hands on her apron and stepped onto the porch, curious about their arrival. "Mrs. Northrop," Reverend Collins called as he helped the young woman down. "I apologize for coming unannounced, but we have a situation that I thought you and Mr. Northrop might be uniquely qualified to assist with." The young woman couldn't have been more than 17, with exhausted eyes and a frightened expression. The baby in her arms whimpered softly. "This is Miss Clara Jenkins," the Reverend explained once they were all seated in the Northrop's comfortable living room. "She's traveling to San Francisco where her aunt lives, but tragedy has struck. Her husband died of fever in Provo, leaving her alone with their 2-month-old son. Clara clutched the baby tighter. "I can't care for him properly," she said, her voice breaking. "I have no money, no milk for him. He's getting weaker each day." She looked up at Rose with desperate eyes. "Reverend Collins said you and your husband took in children who needed a home. That you're good, kind people." Rose exchanged a glance with Wade, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "May I?" Rose asked, holding out her arms. Clara hesitantly transferred the infant, who was indeed thin and pale. Rose cradled him expertly, examining his tiny features. "What's his name?" she asked softly. "William," Clara replied. After his father, Daniel, Lily, and Thomas had gathered in the doorway, watching the scene unfold with curious expressions. Thomas whispered something to Lily, who shushed him gently. "What are you asking of us exactly?" Wade inquired, his voice gentle but direct. Clara twisted her hands in her lap. "I want what's best for William. My aunt barely has room for me in her small apartment, let alone a baby. She works long hours in a factory." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I hoped perhaps you might consider taking him, giving him the home I can't provide." Rose felt a familiar ache in her heart as she looked down at the infant in her arms. 5 times she had held her own newborns, only to lose them. Yet here was a child who needed the love she had never been able to give her biological children. "Would this be a temporary arrangement?" Wade asked. "Until you're established in San Francisco," Clara shook her head, unable to meet their eyes. "I don't think I'll ever be able to provide for him properly. I'm giving him up." Her voice broke on the last word. "Permanently." The room fell silent except for the baby's soft cooing as he nestled against Rose's chest. "This is a serious decision," Wade said finally. "One that shouldn't be made in haste. Miss Jenkins could stay with us for a few days," Rose suggested, looking up from the baby's face, "to be certain this is truly what she wants and to give us time to consider as well." Reverend Collins nodded approvingly. "A wise suggestion, Mrs. Northrop." Later that night, after Clara had been settled in the guest room and the children had gone to bed full of questions and excitement about the baby, Rose and Wade sat by the fire discussing the unexpected turn of events. "It feels like more than coincidence," Rose said softly, watching the flames dance. "That baby finding his way to us." Wade took her hand. "Are you thinking we should take him in?" "I'm thinking about how fragile life is," she replied. "How quickly everything can change. 7 years ago, I was holding our Samuel as he slipped away. I thought I'd never recover from that grief. Now here we are with 3 wonderful children who call us mother and father, being asked to take in another child who needs us. We're not as young as we once were," Wade pointed out gently. "I'm 42, you're 38. Starting over with an infant would be challenging." Rose nodded thoughtfully. "Yes, but we have help now. Daniel, Lily, and Thomas are old enough to understand and assist, and Wade." She turned to face him, her eyes shimmering with emotion. "When I held that baby today, I felt something I haven't felt since before Samuel died. A certainty that this is right, that this child belongs with us." Wade studied his wife's face, seeing in it the same quiet strength that had gradually returned over the years. The grief was still there, it would always be there, but it had been transformed into a deep well of compassion and understanding. "Then we should offer Clara a home for her son," he said simply, "and welcome William into our family." Clara stayed with them for a week, during which time Rose showed her how to properly feed and care for the weakened infant using techniques she had learned through her own brief experiences with motherhood. The young woman clearly loved her son, but was equally clear about her inability to provide for him. On the morning of her departure, Clara stood on the porch with Rose, watching as Wade harnessed the horses to take her to the stage-coach station. "I never imagined giving up my child," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I always judged women who did such a thing." Rose put a comforting hand on the younger woman's arm. "Life has a way of challenging our certainties. You're making an incredibly difficult choice out of love for William, not selfishness." Clara looked at her gratefully. "Will you tell him about me? When he's older, we'll tell him that his first mother loved him enough to ensure he had the best possible life," Rose promised. "That she was brave and selfless. We'll keep the letters you write, and if someday he wishes to know you, we won't stand in the way of that." As the wagon disappeared down the road carrying Clara toward her uncertain future, Rose turned back to the house where Lily was rocking baby William while Thomas entertained him with silly faces. Daniel stood nearby, keeping a watchful eye on the proceedings with the seriousness that characterized his approach to all family responsibilities. Rose felt Wade's arm slip around her waist as he joined her in the doorway. "We've come full circle, haven't we?" he murmured. "From loss to finding family in unexpected ways." She leaned against him, drawing strength from his solid presence as she had for so many years. "Not a circle," she corrected gently. "A spiral. We return to similar places, but we're not the same people we were. We're stronger, wiser, more compassionate." Wade pressed a kiss to her temple. "You were never weak, Rose, not even in your darkest moments." She turned in his arms, looking up at the man who had held her through grief and stayed strong when she couldn't. "Perhaps not. But I'm grateful I never had to find out just how strong I could be on my own. That you were always there, believing in me when I couldn't believe in myself." Inside, baby William let out a gurgling laugh as Thomas made a particularly silly face. The sound drifted out to them like a promise of new beginnings, of joy found after sorrow, of family created through both blood and choice. "Shall we go in?" Wade asked. "It seems our youngest has something to say." Rose smiled, taking his hand as they stepped back into their home, a home built on love, strengthened by grief, and now filled with the laughter of children who had found their way to them through the winding paths of destiny. As years passed, the Northrop family thrived. William grew into a healthy, curious child with Wade's steady temperament, and an unexpected talent for drawing that Rose nurtured enthusiastically. The older children blossomed as well, Daniel eventually taking over much of the ranch management, Lily becoming the town's piano teacher, and Thomas pursuing his education in Denver before returning to Silver Reef to help modernize the mining operations that sustained the community. On the 25th anniversary of their wedding, Rose and Wade stood together on the hillside where 5 small crosses stood among wildflowers. Though weathered by time, each was still carefully maintained, the names still visible, tangible reminders of the babies they had loved and lost. "Do you ever wonder who they might have become?" Rose asked, her hand in Wade's as it had been for a quarter-century. "Every day," Wade admitted. "But then I look at the family we've built, at the joy we've found despite our sorrows, and I think perhaps this was always our path. Not the one we would have chosen, but the one that led us to where we needed to be." Rose nodded, her free hand touching each cross with gentle reverence. "They'll always be part of us. Our first children who taught us how precious life is, how deep love can be." They turned from the hillside toward their home, where their living children and grandchildren waited to celebrate their anniversary. The ranch house had expanded over the years to accommodate their growing family, but its heart remained the same, a place of welcome, of healing, of belonging. As they walked arm in arm, Rose reflected on the journey that had brought them here, from the devastating loss of their 5th baby to the rich, full life they now enjoyed. She remembered Wade's promise all those years ago when she had felt too weak to go on. I'll be strong enough for both of us." He had kept that promise, carrying her through the darkest days of grief until she could stand on her own again. And in doing so, he had helped her discover a strength within herself she never knew existed, the strength to open her heart again, to embrace life with all its joys and sorrows, to create family from both heartbreak and hope. That evening, surrounded by their children and grandchildren, Wade raised a glass in toast. "To family," he said simply, his eyes finding roses across the table. "To love that endures through all seasons." "To love," Rose echoed, her heart full as she looked at the faces gathered around them, faces that would not have been part of their lives had they not weathered the storms of loss together. "And to finding strength when we need it most."